In ancient Egypt, they believed that Ka was the essence or the underlying life force. Anaxagoras was a pre-Socratic philosopher who wrote about some of this almost 3,000 years ago. He talks about Nous as a cosmic intelligence that set everything into motion and pretty much made the order of the universe. He wrote that nothing comes into being nor perishes, but is mixed together and separated from things that are. And that's a crazy accurate quote that sounds exactly like the first law of thermodynamics, which says that energy and matter can never be created or destroyed, they just change form. And we'll talk about that soon. But Eastern philosophers talked about Qi, before that around 700 BC. The Tao Te Ching says the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The Tao gives birth to one, the one gives birth to two, the two gives birth to three, and the three gives birth to the 10,000s of things. And Hindu philosophy has been talking about prana since at least 6,000 BC, but probably longer. The Bhagavad Gita says that which is non-existent can never come to be, and that which is can never cease to be. Pretty much every culture has had a concept of this. Our last session was all about the ancient misunderstanding of air as a metaphysical substance, which you should check out after this. But in this dream session, I want to go through the experiments and science that show exactly how the ancients were probably more in touch with reality in some ways than we realize. But I want to push back a little bit against some of the quantum woo that these so-called enlightened teachers are always spreading. Because the stuff sounds great, but they almost always take it 10 steps too far. There is a logical middle ground between the mystical and the scientific, but I don't think that middle ground should be used as the justification for any nonsense that someone wants to fill it with just to make themselves feel better or to fool people. Tonight we're going to skip the nonsense and actually bridge the gap between physics and ancient wisdom. We'll talk about what really connects energy and matter to what people usually consider the inner spiritual experience. We'll also go over some of the evidence of how our minds can influence physical reality through the placebo effect, the power of prayer, meditation, mantras, music, and self-affirmations. We'll talk about how energy and our actual bodies are connected. Energy is a fundamental property of matter and fields. It's not some magical, standalone force. So next time you hear these gurus talking about energy or the spirit or the soul, if you could ask them what exactly is it, what do you think they would say? They might say it's the essence of the universe or your life force or that it's light. And maybe it is in a way, but then the point is that energy is the fundamental property of matter and fields, and the potential or the rate of vibration or change. It's not the substance itself. But this is exactly where that logical middle ground is. In a minute, we'll talk about how energy converts into matter and matter converts into energy. So to understand this energy, to understand the true creator, let's talk about Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. Energy is equal to mass times the speed of light squared. This equation shows that mass and energy are two forms of the same reality. We know a little bit of matter can release massive energy like in nuclear fission, but the equation also works the other way. Enough energy can release matter. This isn't energy creating matter or matter creating energy, so it doesn't violate the first law of thermodynamics. It's energy converting into matter, not necessarily creating it. This changes how we see the world. The things that we perceive as solid are not static objects. We know they're mostly empty space by a huge percentage. So the brain is the physical medium that gives form to the informational energy of the dream. This spiritual energy is understood as the very fabric of consciousness. It implies a universe that's not inert, but in a way it's kind of alive and dynamic and even responsive. Nothing stands still. Without the electrons revolving around the nucleus of the atom, we wouldn't have a physical reality. And without the planets revolving around the sun, we wouldn't be here to experience any of this. So motion is fundamental and universal as far as we can tell. Plus the photons that are moving, they allow us to see. Whether they're in particles or waves or both, it's all motion everywhere all the time. Nothing stands still. In theory, a particle of light traveling at the speed of light doesn't even experience time. So what would happen if everything in the universe were to just stop and stand still, from the atoms to the cosmos? At CERN, the Large Hadron Collider recreates the extreme high-energy conditions that actually existed a tiny fraction of a second after the Big Bang. So in the Large Hadron Collider, they have a closed system. It's an underground tunnel that forms in a circle, and that's a closed system. The total amount of energy in that system is the energy from the particles plus their motion. They can also measure the amount of mass from the physical particles. When these particles collide for that tiny fraction of a second, they can measure no mass in the system, but the total amount of relativistic energy stays the same. Then a tiny fraction of a second later, they can measure the mass again, but it's different particles. Scientists literally blast particles together at something like 99.999 the speed of light. When these particles collide, they don't just break apart, they seem to vanish. From what they can measure, it's like they dissolve just into a pure burst of energy. Then from that formless energy, new particles of matter are seen to spontaneously form. They call this pair production. They do this basically every day in particle accelerators. It shows that matter can emerge from pure energetic potential. So they'll take protons, which are fundamental particles. They're not made up of atoms, they're smaller. They're what make up an atom. But they're a tiny piece of physical matter, so they smash them together, and for a tiny fraction of a second, that matter's gone. Those protons are gone. They only exist as energy. Then that energy changes into completely different particles like quarks, gluons, and even the Higgs boson. But these are completely different types of matter. There's no protons anymore. And throughout this entire process, nothing is lost. The same amount of physical matter that was there converted into a relative amount of energy, and then converted back into a different type of matter with nothing being lost the entire time. And this is obviously a display of the first law of thermodynamics. Energy and matter can never be created or destroyed, they only change forms. To me, the big question is, what do we know about that energy in between? Scientists call that relativistic energy, which is kind of a strange concept. For that split second where there's no matter, how can there be energy of motion? Well, there is, and it's measurable. It's not tied to a specific object itself. It's a fundamental property of the universe. It's actually the energy of an object at rest and the energy of its motion. I think the conversion of mass into energy is a pretty easy concept for most of us to grasp. You burn a piece of wood, some of it turns into ash, but most of it's gone. It dispersed into heat. And that heat is thermal energy, so that's mass converting into energy. But we know also that energy converts into mass interchangeably, which is a strange concept for us to grasp as physical beings. It's the idea of that wood turning into heat and then the heat turning back into a different type of wood. That's not literally what happens with wood and heat, but it's an easier way to imagine what we're talking about. Another aspect of this that's crazy to imagine is how they collide photons and get physical matter. Photons are not physical particles in the way that protons or ions are. Those things have physical mass, but photons aren't physical particles. They have no mass. They're packets of pure electromagnetic energy. They're like condensed pockets of light. So when they smash together photons, they're making two different pockets of energy collide, and after that, they get physical matter. So when two high-energy photons collide, they make an electron-positron pair, which is a particle and an antiparticle. With even stronger collisions, they can make more massive pairs like muon and anti-muon pairs. So they're turning energy into matter. This is what some might want to call getting something from nothing, but it's not actually nothing that it's coming from. It's that there's always something, it's just in different forms. What's also kind of crazy is that quantum physicists describe all physical particles as being condensed packets of energy, the same way we imagine photons. So from that perspective, there's no such thing as just strictly physical. Again, it's like looking out over an ocean and looking perfectly level at it from the sides. We won't see the flat water, that's just a flat line, basically, and that would represent a quantum field. When there's a disturbance in the water, we will see the waves sticking up over the flat plane of water. Those waves are the excitations in the water, just like physical particles are the excitations in a quantum field. Of course, instead of a flat plane of water level, you have to imagine this quantum field as being multidimensional. which is where it can be tough to translate the analogy, but I hope that helps. My point is that it doesn't really matter what you believe about this, it happens all the time. And before people deny it, they should really read the studies and just maybe even take a basic course in particle physics and quantum mechanics, because they have plenty cheap or even free options online, and it's worth it. It's a major piece of the puzzle when you're trying to understand the nature of reality here. All of this kind of points in an interesting direction when you realize that there is no mass without energy, but there is energy without mass. Maybe this is why so many people throughout all of history have claimed that energy is the essence of reality. Anywhere we have a particle with mass, it automatically has to have energy. But it is possible to just have energy without any particles of mass. So when Christians try to ask me what came before the Big Bang, or they try to say that we believe something came from nothing, I just assume that they've never heard of this, or that they just don't understand it at all. I actually don't know of any scientist who believes that something came from nothing. Even the cosmologists who developed the singularity theorems like Penrose and Hawking, they ended up rejecting that assumption, and they were the ones that contributed to its discovery. So in reality, our physics can't reliably describe the universe to us until after this theoretical singularity. So there's no reason to assume the universe isn't eternal. The term Big Bang itself was actually coined by Fred Hoyle, who was a detractor of that theory. If they want to say their God is the sufficient first cause that exists outside of time, they could just drop the extra baggage and call it the universe, or call it nature. That's God. Yes, there's still mysteries, but we shouldn't fill those gaps with a vengeful, self-contradicting, man-like being who supposedly gave us a holy book, but it's actually full of the sexual war fantasies of ancient men. There is wisdom in ancient writings, but the human mind can build on the best parts that reflect reality and let the worst parts teach us about the psychology of the writers at that time. And this is where it gets even more interesting and actually connects to all of us in a way that we can tell. How do we bridge the gap between physical and non-physical? And I think the next biggest question is whether or not consciousness is a necessary variable in all of this. Is consciousness a fundamental property of this energy? Is it the energy itself? Does panpsychism have a place in these ideas? And if not, and if consciousness is just an emergent property of these physical systems, can it still have an effect and a direct relationship with the energy and the matter? Because if reality at its most basic level is a sea of energy, then where does consciousness fit into all of this? This is where the double-slit experiment is so powerful. In the double-slit experiment, a particle like an electron acts like a wave. It's in multiple places at once until you introduce a measurement to it. That measurement changes everything. Most scientists say this is the observer effect. The quantum wave of the particle is so sensitive that the act of measuring it, the physical interaction with the detector, forces it to choose a single location. It's a purely physical interaction that causes the wave to collapse into a particle. But there's a few people that have argued that it's not the detector that causes the collapse. It's actually the conscious effort to measure and observe the result. The idea is that the particle doesn't really choose a location until a conscious mind registers the information. But scientists are pretty good at ruling out these kinds of ideas. They've run experiments with automated detectors that measure the particles and store the data without a human ever looking at it. And even in these cases, the particles still act like they were observed, and they collapse into a single location. This would suggest that the physical interaction of measurement and not consciousness is the cause. Still, this all leaves us with a truly ultimate mystery. If reality is fundamentally energy, and that energy seems to be the source of all physical matter, where does the consciousness fit into all of it? There's a few different ways to think about this. Panpsychism is the idea that argues that consciousness, or at least a mind-like quality, is a fundamental property of the universe, just like energy. Everything has a degree of consciousness in panpsychism, from the smallest particles to the biggest galaxies. And if that's true, then our consciousness is just a complex combination of all those tiny consciousnesses. Panpsychism kind of says that these smaller degrees of consciousness have to be arranged in specific ways to give consciousness like ours. And then there's emergent consciousness, and that's a different kind of concept. This is pretty much the most common scientific view. Consciousness as an emergent property says that it's just a byproduct of a highly complex physical system like a brain. You could think of it kind of like a traffic jam. A single car isn't a traffic jam, but put enough cars together in the right way and one will emerge. Consciousness in this view is a high-level phenomenon that doesn't exist at the particle level. Or some people believe in downward causation. This is where we can find a middle ground between these two ideas. It argues that even if consciousness is an emergent property, once it's formed, it can have a direct relationship with energy and matter. It's like a feedback loop. Your conscious thought to lift your arm isn't just a shadow of a physical process, it's a real causal event that affects the physical world. And this brings us to the biggest unknown of all. If reality is fundamentally energetic and observation seems to affect it, then what exactly is the relationship between this energy and our own consciousness? Is consciousness a necessary part of the equation? That we still don't know, but what we do know is that we have consciousness and it affects reality directly and indirectly, and vice versa. How directly and how much it affects the reality still isn't clear, but even from a conservative, more material perspective, you could say our brains make the consciousness controls the decisions that direct the body, that influences the world around us, which is being influenced by so many other conscious beings, which collectively is shaping our external reality, which obviously then helps shape our internal reality, and here we are. The fact that a belief can change your physical body isn't some mystical, unexplainable thing. It does have a real tangible basis in the actual brain. I want to talk about the brain as a biological dreamer, a physical thing that actually gives form to your thoughts. First, there's neuroplasticity. It's crazy to think, but your brain isn't a static machine. The structure of it, the pathways and connections, they're all constantly being changed and rewired by your experiences and by your beliefs. When you consistently focus on something, whether it's a fear or a hope, you're literally reinforcing those neural pathways. It's how habits are formed, and it's how your mind's energy becomes a physical part of you. Then there's the neurochemicals that make the placebo effect so powerful. When you believe a fake pill will take away the pain, your brain releases its own endorphins, and that belief-based energy forms a real physical effect. And that's not magic, it's actually just chemistry. And that's the placebo effect. You just have to believe it. You can also see this in what scientists call the default mode network. This is a set of brain regions that are active when your mind is kind of just wandering and thinking about the past or worrying about the future, or if it's just like stuck in a loop of self-reflection. But studies show that spiritual practices like meditation and focused intention can actually quiet the DMN. And this can be really helpful because when you do that, you're not just calming your thoughts, you're actually shifting your physical brain into a state where you're more present and more connected. And this is what helps people release emotional baggage a lot of times, and it helps them find that feeling of being centered. It's tangible physical evidence for what people feel during meditation. And this is all to say that your thoughts and beliefs aren't just abstract ideas. They're a form of energy that has a real measurable effect on your physical brain, and through that, on your body. You know, think about looking up at the sky full of stars on a clear night or standing in front of a breathtaking vista or something like that. That feeling of awe isn't just emotional. It can actually trigger changes in the brain activity and even our physiology, and it can reduce stress and promote a sense of well-being. It's like our brains are wired to respond positively to the sheer scale and beauty of the universe. Nature truly holds a kind of magic, and not even in a supernatural sense, but in its profound ability to shift our perspective and our internal state. So this kind of leads us into prayer. I couldn't misrepresent the data to get more views, but it's honest to say that rigorous trials don't show any direct effect of prayer on the physical healing of others beyond factors like the placebo effect. People have been doing studies on prayer since the late 1800s, and in our modern days, they're spending millions of dollars each year on different prayer studies. There's so many different studies on prayer. One of the biggest studies was the STEP project. It was published in the American Heart Journal in 2006. They separated people into 3 different groups. One group had people actively praying for them, but they didn't know it. Another group didn't have anyone praying for them. And then the third group had people praying for them, and they actually knew about it. They didn't find any real difference between patients who were prayed for and the ones that weren't. And actually, the group who knew that they were being prayed for did slightly worse than the other 2 groups. The doctors think this might have something to do with the psychological effects of anxiety and stuff like that, maybe just from knowing that people were praying for them. There's been other studies done similar to this that pretty much show the same results. And if you're actually interested in more details about this, I'll leave links to all of these studies and articles in the description here. What's also interesting is that other studies do show some subtle effects, but they're probably more in the placebo way, or maybe just in the mindfulness way. A 2015 study showed that intercessory prayer for someone that you love could improve a relationship, and it showed improvements in the praying person's heart. So this would probably suggest a more internal physiological benefit to the person that's actually doing the praying, which is similar to other mindfulness practices. And then these effects can spread to the people around you, so there can be positive effects from prayer. And of course, it's hard to really control for these experiments, and there's a lot of complications there. They say thou shalt not test the Lord, and even though the Lord says that he wants people to know him, and he's tested all the time in the Bible and has no problem with it, then whatever, it gets kind of complicated. And even if, who's genuinely praying and who's not, and there's just so many factors to take into consideration. This doesn't negate the profound personal benefits of prayer. Like the placebo effect, it can work through subtle psychobiological mechanisms. And this also brings us to another bridge between the physical and the spiritual, which is sound and vibration. Sound is a form of energy. It's a wave that carries force, and it causes physical changes. Everything vibrates, and these vibrations are a form of energy. This is where practices like mantras, self-affirmations, healing sounds, nature sounds, and music are all relevant. The repetition of a mantra like Om or a phrase like I am isn't just a mental exercise. The vibration of the sound and the focused intention behind it can form a pattern. It's possible for this vibration to directly influence our brainwaves and to calm the nervous system. It also reinforces new types of neural pathways, and not just for you, but even for other people that hear it. The specific frequencies and harmonics resonate with the body. And our bodies are mostly water, don't forget. And that's a great conductor of vibration, so the sound waves literally pass through us, and they cause a kind of internal sonic massage that can help us relax, and it can shift our energetic state. And this can all be used to regulate our energy. The sounds of a flowing stream or rain falling aren't just nice to listen to. They're actually literally like non-threatening signals to our nervous system, and they can help to down-regulate our stress responses and bring our energetic system back into a sort of balance. These things are actually magical in their own scientific context. There's no need to attach a bunch of nonsense to them. So this conversation about energy isn't supernatural, and it's not metaphysical. It's actually natural and physical. It's at the core of atomic structure and also at the core of ancient spiritual awareness. This idea of energy as information and potential brings us to dreams. They can definitely be considered a manifestation of our mental energy. As far back as we can tell, cultures have seen dreams as energetic channels. The ancient Egyptians built dream temples for healing and prophecy. The ancient Greeks visited healing centers dedicated to Asclepius, and they thought he would appear in their dreams to offer a cure. Native American tribes used dreams to connect with ancestral wisdom and spirit guides. And in modern psychology, especially with Carl Jung, They saw dreams pretty much as creative expressions of our psyche. Jung kind of gave us the formal idea of the collective unconscious, which is pretty much like a vast reservoir of shared human experiences and archetypes. He said that dreams are the language of this collective unconscious, and they were like a bridge to humanity's wisdom that could guide us in the direction of psychological wholeness. Dreams are a nightly opportunity to go through and explore our more inner energetic landscape. They can also help us process emotions and find creative solutions to things. They're a good example of how subtle energy manifests information that we can learn from. I have a lot more videos on my page about that specifically, and I also wrote a book, heavily research-based, but it's a simple guide on remembering and mastering dreams. The ebook is actually free to download, and you'll find it in the link in my link tree on all platforms, wherever you're watching this. So, those moments when you're listening to a song, or when you're in a deep meditation, or holding someone you love, or even watching the sunset, that can be when your mind is synchronized in a way, and when something shifts inside of you. That's your inner energy realigning, and it works with your body and the neurochemical processes. So all those spiritual practices like focused meditation, breath work, and Tai Chi, they're not just rituals. At their core, they're really techniques of energetic tuning. They can definitely help us release some emotional baggage and to center ourselves. These practices can teach us to observe the energy and to kind of work with it in a way. It can help anyone grasp the unifying principle of existence. Spirituality can remind us to feel this energy. Science gives us the logical language to understand its mechanics, and somewhere in the space where these perspectives meet is you. You're not just particles, you're like a microcosm of the universe, and you are an actual expression of the same energy that helps fuel those cosmos. We're all stardust, brought to life by energy, imbued with beliefs, and we're eternally dreaming. The same force that creates galaxies actually pulses in all of us. So let's just dream together for a minute about the potential for creative minds to collectively build. Without the limiting beliefs of doubt or the distractions of religiously motivated zealots, we can co-create a more intentional and hopeful reality that's based on more information and less speculation. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Science is not a one-way dead-end road. It's just a process of understanding things more accurately, and nature is full of enough magic to keep us in awe and to feed our dreams forever. I would like to hear how you guys feel about the concept of energy, whether it's through science, spirituality, or your dreams. You could drop a comment down below and tell me what resonated with you about all of this. If you're curious about how dream analysis can help you grow, or if you're interested in ancient symbolism or the fundamental aspects of reality and nature, then make sure to subscribe and follow my page. Check out the link tree to find all my stuff. Peace and love, people. Stay true, stay curious, and keep dreaming.